I'm Elaine Reynolds, 32 years old, and I died last year, or at least that's what my family believes. After my leukemia diagnosis, my parents and sister disappeared from my life, only to resurface when they thought there was money to collect. They abandoned me during my darkest hours, never imagining I'd discover their betrayal or that I'd have a plan ready. Before I tell you how I outsmarted the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned the tables on the family who left me to die alone. Growing up in our pristine colonial home in Lexington, Massachusetts, I truly believed I had the perfect family. My father, Arthur Reynolds, was a respected corporate attorney, while my mother, Margaret, maintained our home with meticulous care. From the outside, we looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting: Sunday dinners, matching outfits for holiday photos, and summer vacations to Cape Cod. I spent my childhood believing in the solidity of our family unit. My sister Brooke arrived when I was 4, completing our picture-perfect family. I initially adored having a little sister, dressing her up and reading her stories before bed. I can still remember the smell of her baby shampoo as I helped our mother bathe her. I was the protective older sister, always making sure she had the best of everything. As we grew older, subtle shifts began occurring in our family dynamic. My straight-A report cards received quick nods, while Brooke's B-minuses were celebrated with ice cream outings. Elaine's always been so self-sufficient, my mother would explain to relatives when they noticed the disparity in attention. I accepted this explanation, believing my independence was something to be proud of. By high school, the differences became more pronounced. I joined the debate team, science club, and volunteered at the local hospital, building my resume for college applications. Meanwhile, Brooke became a cheerleader and homecoming princess. My parents never missed her football games or dances, but regularly skipped my debate tournaments, even when I made it to state finals. "Your sister needs more support," my father explained when I asked why they couldn't attend my scholarship award ceremony. "You understand, don't you? You've always been the strong one." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment and learning to celebrate my achievements alone. When I was accepted to Northwestern University with a full scholarship, my parents hosted a small dinner. 2 months later, they threw Brooke a lavish party for getting into Boston College, despite her needing their financial support. I told myself it was fine. I was preparing for independence, while Brooke still needed them. Medical school at University of Chicago followed undergraduate, and my visits home became increasingly infrequent. Each time I returned, I felt more like a guest than a daughter. My childhood bedroom had been converted into a home office, while Brooke's remained untouched even after she moved into her own apartment in Boston. Our phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. My parents rarely asked about my medical training, but would talk endlessly about Brooke's job at a marketing firm. When I completed my residency in pediatrics, neither of my parents attended the ceremony, citing a weekend getaway they'd planned months earlier. I built my life in Chicago, eventually joining a well-respected pediatric practice. I purchased a comfortable condo overlooking Lake Michigan and established myself professionally. I dated occasionally, but focused primarily on my career, finding fulfillment in helping children. My relationship with my family settled into holiday phone calls and occasional visits. At 31, my life seemed perfectly on track. I was considering partnership at my practice, had a close circle of friends, and had finally achieved financial stability after years of student loans. Then the symptoms started: unusual bruising on my arms after minimal contact, extreme fatigue that coffee couldn't cure, and infections that lingered despite antibiotics. At first, I dismissed these signs, attributing them to long hours and stress. But when I found myself winded after climbing a single flight of stairs, the doctor in me knew something was wrong. The hematology department at Northwestern Memorial was familiar territory. I'd referred patients there many times. But sitting on the examination table as a patient felt surreal. Dr. Natalie Goldman, a colleague I occasionally saw at medical conferences, entered with a file folder that looked too thick for comfort. "The blood work confirmed what we suspected, Elaine," she said, her professional demeanor softened with compassion. You have acute myeloid leukemia. The blast cells are at 28%. Despite being a doctor, I felt the floor drop away beneath me. I knew what AML meant. Aggressive treatment, uncertain outcomes, and a complete disruption of life as I knew it. I listened as Natalie outlined treatment options: immediate intensive induction chemotherapy, potential bone marrow transplant, clinical trials if first-line treatments failed. With your age and overall health, you have good prognostic factors, she explained. But I won't sugarcoat this. It's going to be a difficult road. I nodded mechanically, my mind already calculating survival rates and treatment protocols. What's the timeline? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. We should begin treatment within the week. You'll need to take a leave of absence from work. Do you have family who can help during this time? Family. The word triggered a reflex of hope. Of course my parents would want to know. Despite our distant relationship, surely a cancer diagnosis would bring them back into my life. That evening, I sat on my sofa overlooking the Chicago skyline and called home. My mother answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I need to tell you something important. I've been diagnosed with leukemia. Acute myeloid leukemia. The silence lasted several seconds before she responded.
Oh, Elaine.
That sounds serious. It is serious, Mom. I'm starting chemotherapy next week. The treatment is intense, and I thought maybe you and Dad might. Oh, honey, this is such difficult timing, she interrupted. Brooke's wedding is in 3 months, and we're in the middle of all the arrangements. Your father is working overtime to cover the costs, and I'm helping with everything from flowers to seating charts. I pressed my fingers against my closed eyelids. Mom, I have cancer. Stage 3. I understand, dear. But you've always been so independent. And Chicago has excellent medical facilities. We'll certainly try to visit after the wedding, once things settle down. My throat tightened. The doctors say the first rounds of treatment are the hardest. I could really use some support now. You know how to take care of yourself, Elaine. You're a doctor, after all. Brooke is counting on this wedding being perfect. She'd be devastated if we got distracted right now. I ended the call shortly after, promising to keep them updated. My parents didn't ask what hospital I would be at, what my treatment protocol was, or if I needed help with my condo or bills. They simply assumed I would handle everything alone, as I always had. The next morning, I entered Northwestern Memorial for my first round of chemotherapy. The nurses were kind, explaining procedures I already understood professionally but was experiencing for the first time as a patient. As the chemicals dripped into my veins, I scrolled through my phone, looking at photos from Brooke's engagement party that my parents had shared on Facebook. Their smiling faces surrounded my sister, celebrating her milestone while I sat alone with poison entering my bloodstream to save my life. A week into treatment, the side effects hit full force. My hair began falling out in clumps, nausea kept me tethered to the bathroom, and mouth sores made eating painful. I called my parents again, hoping the reality of my condition might change their response. Dad, I'm really struggling. I admitted, something I'd rarely done in my life. Your mother says you're a fighter, Elaine, he replied. Brooke's having some issues with the caterer, and it's causing her anxiety. You know how sensitive she is. We need to focus on keeping her calm right now. As my treatment progressed, my parents' excuses multiplied. They were too busy with wedding tastings, then with dress fittings. I stopped calling after the 3rd week, when my father cut our conversation short because they were late for Brooke's bridal shower. As summer turned to fall, my condition deteriorated despite aggressive treatment. The first round of chemotherapy failed to induce remission, necessitating a more intensive second round. I took an extended leave from my practice, using up my savings to cover the portions of treatment my insurance didn't. My hair was completely gone. I'd lost 20 pounds from my already slim frame, and fatigue colored every moment of my existence. My colleagues checked in when they could, bringing occasional meals or stopping by between shifts. My neighbor Rachel walked my neglected houseplants from my condo to hers, promising to keep them alive. But the visitors dwindled as my illness stretched from weeks into months, everyone returning to their busy lives while mine remained on indefinite hold. Each morning, I checked my phone, hoping for a message from my parents or Brooke. Most days, there was nothing. Occasionally, my mother would send a brief text asking how I was feeling, without waiting for a response before launching into details about wedding preparations or complaints about the florist. In October, I received a group text meant for extended family. Brooke's wedding was absolutely magical. She was the most beautiful bride Boston has seen in years. Arthur and I couldn't be prouder parents. Attached were dozens of photos of my beaming family, my absence conspicuously unmentioned. No one had asked why I wasn't there, or my parents had provided an excuse. Either way, it seemed I had already been erased. 2 weeks after the wedding, when I was hospitalized for neutropenic fever, I tried calling home again. My mother answered, sounding relaxed and happy. "We're just so relieved the wedding went perfectly," she said after a cursory inquiry about my health. "And now Brooke has some exciting news. She's pregnant. It happened on their honeymoon in Bali. We're going to be grandparents, Elaine." I lay in my hospital bed and pumping antibiotics into my compromised system, listening to my mother gush about nursery colors and gender reveal parties. She didn't ask about my treatment progress or offer to visit. When I mentioned I might need a bone marrow transplant, she quickly changed the subject back to Brooke's morning sickness. It was during this hospitalization that I met Catherine Dempsey, a night shift nurse with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She found me crying silently one night after another disappointing call with my parents. "Family troubles?" she asked, checking my phone. I nodded, too exhausted to pretend otherwise. "Sometimes the people who should love us the most let us down the hardest," she said, adjusting my blankets. "I've seen it too many times in this ward." Catherine began stopping by, even when she wasn't assigned to my room. She brought me ginger tea for nausea and sat with me during particularly rough nights. She listened without judgment as I gradually shared the history of my family dynamics, offering perspectives I'd been too close to see. "It sounds like you've been the family scapegoat," she observed one evening. "The strong one who needs nothing and gets nothing in return." In November, scrolling through social media from my hospital bed, I discovered my parents had taken a luxury cruise while telling me they couldn't visit because of work commitments. There they were, smiling in matching resort wear on a Caribbean beach, while I fought for my life alone in Chicago. That same week, Brooke posted ultrasound photos with the caption, "Mom and Dad coming to every appointment with me. So blessed to have such supportive parents. #luckiest girl ever." The contrast was stark enough to finally break through my lifelong pattern of making excuses for them. My parents weren't absent because of distance or busy schedules. They were absent because they chose to be. In December, Dr. Goldman delivered the news I'd been dreading. The standard treatments weren't working. My cancer was resistant and my options were narrowing. We needed to consider experimental protocols or an aggressive transplant approach, both with significant risks. "Is there anyone you want to call before we make these decisions?" she asked gently. I thought about my parents, who still hadn't visited once during my 6 months of treatment. I thought about Brooke, who had sent a single text saying, "Get well soon," with a flower emoji. "No," I answered. "There's no one I need to call." January brought a temporary improvement in my condition, allowing me to return to my condo between treatments. During this reprieve, I decided to organize my financial affairs, uncertain of what the future held. While searching for my birth certificate in my files, I discovered an old envelope I'd forgotten about, containing documents my grandmother had given me before she passed away when I was in college. Among these papers was a copy of my parents' will from 15 years earlier, which my grandmother had apparently kept. In it, both Brooke and I were listed as equal beneficiaries. Curious if this was still the case, I contacted my cousin Julia, who worked as a paralegal at the law firm my parents used for estate planning. What Julia revealed shattered any remaining illusions I had about my place in my family. 3 years earlier, after a disagreement about a family vacation I couldn't attend due to residency obligations, my parents had completely removed me from their will. Everything would go to Brooke, the house I grew up in, the vacation property on Cape Cod, and all financial assets. "I assumed you knew," Julia said uncomfortably. Uncle Arthur said you'd agreed it made more sense since you were so successful on your own and Brooke needed more security. I hadn't known. I hadn't agreed to anything. Julia, perhaps feeling guilty, shared more family secrets. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on their home to help Brooke buy her condo and start her business. They had told extended family members that I never visited because I was too caught up in my important career to make time for family, not because they rarely invited me or acknowledged my accomplishments. Most painfully, she revealed that when our grandmother died, she had left a significant inheritance specifically for my education and future security. My parents had been entrusted as managers of these funds until I turned 30, a birthday that had passed 2 years ago. I had never received a penny, nor had I known about this inheritance. I think they used it for Brooke's college and wedding, Julie admitted. Aunt Margaret always said you didn't need it with all your scholarships. The systematic betrayal left me breathless. While I had worked multiple jobs through college and taken on substantial loans for medical school, my parents had been sitting on money specifically intended for me, diverting it to my sister. That evening, in a rare moment of confrontation, I called my parents and directly asked about the inheritance. That money was for the family, my father said dismissively. Your grandmother would have wanted it used where it was needed most. And you didn't think helping your daughter through medical school was a need? I asked, my voice shaking. Oh, Elaine, don't be dramatic, my mother interjected. You've always been so independent. Brooke needed that support more than you did.
And what about now?
I'm fighting cancer. I've been in treatment for months. I might not survive this. My father's voice turned cold. Don't exaggerate your condition for attention, Elaine. Your mother spoke with one of the doctors in your practice who said leukemia is quite treatable these days. You're making it sound more serious than it is. The casual dismissal of my life-threatening illness was the final cut. I've been doing intensive chemotherapy for 6 months. I've lost my hair, I can barely eat, and I might need a bone marrow transplant. Which part of that sounds like an exaggeration? Well, if it was really that serious, you would have made more effort to let us know, my mother replied. You always were one to suffer in silence to make a point. After hanging up, I broke down completely. Catherine, who had become a friend and was visiting to check on me, held me while I sobbed out decades of rejection and hurt. When I finally quieted, a strange calm settled over me. They're never going to change, I said, the realization both painful and freeing. Nothing I accomplish, nothing I suffer will ever make them see me. Catherine nodded slowly. So, what are you going to do about it? In that moment, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I stopped asking what I could do to earn my parents' love and started asking what I could do to free myself from needing it. The next morning, I called Marco Santini, an attorney specializing in estate law whom I'd met during a hospital fundraiser years earlier. I explained my situation. The diverted inheritance, my medical condition, and my desire to understand my legal options. Marco's office was warm and reassuring, with credentials on the walls and family photos on his desk. After listening to my story, he asked questions about my grandmother's original bequest. If we can locate the original trust documents, you may have a case for recovering those funds, he explained. But there's something else you should know. Marco revealed that in Illinois, there were specific laws protecting disinherited children with serious medical conditions. More importantly, he discovered something my parents likely didn't know. My grandmother had established a separate trust with a little-known provision. Your grandmother owned property in Maine that wasn't part of your parents' assets, Marco explained, showing me documentation. She established what's called a generation-skipping trust. It specifically states that if either you or your sister are unfairly disinherited from your parents' estate, the main property reverts directly to the disinherited grandchild upon proof of the disinheritance. The property, 200 acres of pristine lakefront land, had been in my grandmother's family for generations. Development in the area had significantly increased its value to several $1,000,000. Your grandmother was clearly concerned about fair treatment, Marco observed. She built in protections you never knew about. As we discussed options, an idea began forming in my mind. Dr. Goldman had recently mentioned an experimental treatment program in Switzerland that was showing promising results for cases like mine. My insurance wouldn't cover it, and the cost was prohibitive, unless I could access my grandmother's trust. What would happen if my parents believed I had died? I asked Marco. His eyebrows rose. Legally speaking, the generation-skipping provision would be triggered immediately, since you would no longer be able to inherit from your parents. Over the next few weeks, as I continued treatment, the plan evolved. Marco confirmed the main property's value at approximately $4 million. Catherine introduced me to her brother, a cybersecurity expert who could help establish a new identity. Dr. Goldman, bound by patient confidentiality, agreed to connect me with the Swiss treatment center. In my condo, Catherine helped me record video testimony about my family's abandonment during my illness. I documented the missed calls, unanswered texts, and broken promises. I detailed the discovery of the misused inheritance and my removal from the will. This isn't about revenge, I explained to the camera. This is about justice and creating the possibility for me to survive. I wrote a detailed letter revealing all the truths my parents had hidden, from their financial manipulations to their emotional neglect. I included copies of text messages, bank statements showing my depleted savings from medical costs, and medical records documenting my struggle with cancer alone. Marco prepared legal documents that would transfer the main property to my new identity upon confirmation of my death. Catherine agreed to serve as executor of my final wishes, including the delivery of my letter at precisely the right moment. We planned every detail meticulously. My medical records would show a decline followed by complications leading to death. Catherine would handle the funeral arrangements, prepaid with specific instructions. My parents would be notified, but not until everything was in place. Are you sure about this? Catherine asked as we finalized the arrangements. Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. I thought about the 6 months I'd spent fighting for my life, while my family carried on as if I didn't exist. I thought about the years of conditional love and the systematic betrayal that had culminated in my darkest hour. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied. It's time I put myself first. It's the only way I might survive. In late February, I moved to a remote cabin outside Chicago that Catherine's family owned. Official records showed me entering hospice care as my condition deteriorated. Dr. Goldman provided documentation of complications consistent with advanced leukemia, while my actual treatment continued privately. On March 15th, Elaine Reynolds officially died of complications from acute myeloid leukemia. Catherine handled the death certificate and notifications, including the carefully timed call to my parents. From the cabin, using Catherine's secured laptop, I watched my plan unfold. Through Catherine's eyes and updates, I witnessed my family's sudden reappearance after months of absence. They arrived at the funeral home within 48 hours of being notified, the fastest response I'd received from them in years. Catherine reported that my mother seemed shocked by the expensive funeral arrangements I had prepaid. She asked if they could downgrade the casket to something more reasonable. Catherine told me over our secure line. When the funeral director explained everything had been arranged and paid for by you, she seemed confused about where you got the money. The funeral service was scheduled for a week after my death. Catherine set up a discreet camera so I could observe remotely. I watched as my parents and Brooke, now visibly pregnant, entered the chapel. My mother wore an elegant black dress that looked newly purchased. My father maintained his stoic, attorney demeanor. Brooke dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Several of my colleagues spoke about my dedication to pediatric medicine. My neighbor Rachel shared stories about my kindness. Not once did my family approach the podium to share memories or expressions of grief. As Catherine had predicted, the questions about financial matters began immediately after the service. My father cornered Marco, who had attended as my attorney. "We understand Elaine may have had some investments we weren't aware of," he said, his voice low but urgent. "As her next of kin, we'd like to discuss the transfer of these assets." Marco maintained his professional composure. "There will be a formal reading of the will tomorrow at my office. All will be explained then." Catherine overheard my mother asking the funeral director about my condo, specifically, when they could access it to collect Elaine's things. Not once did she ask about my final days, or whether I had suffered. That evening, security cameras I had installed captured my family entering my condo using the emergency key I had once given my father. They moved through my home like assessors, opening drawers and checking closets. My mother picked up and set down framed photos without lingering on the images of my life. Brooke examined my jewelry box, trying on several pieces before pocketing a pearl necklace our grandmother had given me. My father spent most time in my home office, searching through files and examining my computer. There has to be something about the main property, I heard him mutter, unaware that all important documents had been removed weeks earlier. The next morning, they arrived at Marco's office dressed in somber but expensive attire. Catherine, present as my executor, reported that they appeared confident, with my father carrying a briefcase full of documents, likely to claim whatever assets they expected to find. Marco welcomed them into the conference room where a large screen was set up. Before we proceed with the distribution of assets, he began, Elaine left specific instructions that a letter and video should be shared with you privately. Is that really necessary? My mother asked. We're all still processing our grief. It is both necessary and legally required, Marco replied, pressing play on the video I had recorded. On screen, my pale but determined face appeared. If you're watching this, it means I've died from the cancer that I fought alone for the past 9 months. Mom, Dad, Brooke, you're probably sitting in Marco's office right now, eager to learn what assets I've left behind. Let me save you some time. I know everything. I watched through Catherine's hidden camera as my family's expressions shifted from impatience to shock as my recorded self detailed every betrayal. The diverted inheritance, my removal from the will, the lies told to extended family, and most of all, their complete abandonment during my illness. While I underwent chemotherapy alone, you took cruises. While I lost my hair and fought infections, you planned Brooke's wedding. While I faced my mortality in hospital rooms, you celebrated becoming grandparents. Not once did you visit. Not once did you offer help. The only time you've moved quickly regarding me in years was rushing to this office after my death. My father's face had turned ashen. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Brooke stared at the floor, one hand protectively over her pregnant belly. But here's what you don't know. My recorded image continued. Grandmother left the main property in a generation-skipping trust with specific provisions for disinheritance. That property is worth $4 million, and as of my death, it no longer passes through you. And one more thing you should know. The screen went blank momentarily, then showed a split screen, my recorded self on one side and a live feed of me, very much alive, on the other. I'm not actually dead. The looks on my family's faces as they realized I was alive were a mixture of shock, confusion, and most tellingly, disappointment. My father recovered first, his attorney instincts kicking in. This is fraud, he sputtered, half rising from his chair. You faked your own death to access the main property. We'll contest this immediately. Marco calmly slid a folder across the table. Everything Elaine has done is completely legal. She never officially declared her own death. Her doctors did, based on their medical assessment of a terminal condition. The death certificate lists acute myeloid leukemia as the cause, which Elaine legitimately has. There was no insurance fraud, no false claims filed. But she's clearly alive, my mother protested, pointing at the screen where I sat wrapped in a blanket, my thin frame and bald head testament to my ongoing battle. Yes, I am, I replied through the video connection. I've been accepted into an experimental treatment program in Switzerland that my doctors believe might save my life. A treatment none of you offered to help with, despite knowing about my condition for 9 months. We didn't realize it was so serious, Brooke said quietly, speaking for the first time. I told you repeatedly how serious it was, I countered. I called from hospital rooms. I texted during chemotherapy sessions. I literally said the words "I might die" to each of you multiple times. Marco continued with the legal explanation. The generation-skipping trust has very specific language. It activates when a grandchild is unfairly disinherited, which happened 3 years ago when Elaine was removed from your will without her knowledge. Her medical condition only accelerated the timeline for executing these provisions. "You'll never get away with this," my father threatened, though his voice lacked conviction.
Actually, she already has, Marco replied.
The transfer of the main property was completed this morning. Furthermore, should you attempt to contest this or make any public accusations, Elaine has authorized me to release her letter and supporting documentation to every family member and business associate in your network. My mother paled. "You wouldn't dare. It would destroy our reputation." From my remote location, I leaned closer to the camera. "I don't want to do that. Despite everything, I don't want to hurt you the way you hurt me. I just want what's rightfully mine. What grandmother intended me to have, so I can fight for my life." The meeting ended shortly after, with my family leaving in stunned silence. Catherine later reported they made a half-hearted attempt to talk to some law firms about contesting the trust, but each attorney they consulted confirmed Marco's assessment. They had no legal grounds to challenge the transfer. 2 weeks later, I began treatment at the Swiss Medical Center, using funds from the sale of a small portion of the main property. The experimental protocol was grueling, but showed promising results. By summer, my cancer was in remission, though doctors cautioned that the journey to full recovery would be long. During my treatment and recovery, I received an outpouring of support from unexpected sources. Colleagues from my practice sent care packages. My cousin Julia visited Switzerland, apologizing for her unwitting role in my family's deception. Even some of my patients' families, learning of my condition, sent cards and well wishes. My parents and Brooke never contacted me directly again. Through family grapevines, I learned they had crafted a narrative that I had suffered a mental breakdown due to my illness and made unfounded accusations against them. Few believed them, especially after Julia and other relatives shared their own experiences of my parents' favoritism over the years. As my strength returned, I made decisions about my future. I sold the Chicago condo, too filled with painful memories, and purchased a small house near the Swiss clinic where I could continue follow-up treatments. With the remaining proceeds from the main property, I established a foundation supporting cancer patients who lacked family support systems. Catherine visited regularly, our friendship deepening through the crucible of all we'd experienced together. She eventually accepted a position at the Swiss hospital, bringing her compassionate nursing skills to patients from around the world. On the 1-year anniversary of my death, I walked along Lake Geneva, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. My hair had grown back in soft curls, I had regained weight, and my latest scans showed no signs of cancer. I was, in every sense, experiencing a rebirth. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who stands by you when the diagnosis comes, who holds your hand during treatment, who fights for your life when others have written you off." I lost the family I was born into, but I found the family I deserve. The truth is, sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who let you down the hardest. But that doesn't mean you have to accept their definition of your worth. Sometimes survival means walking away from toxic relationships, even when they're with the people who gave you life. Sometimes it means creating your own inheritance, not of money, but of dignity, self-respect, and the courage to put yourself first. I'm still Elaine Reynolds. I died, but I lived. And in that rebirth, I finally learned that the only approval I truly needed was my own. If my story resonated with you, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on family obligations versus self-preservation. Have you ever had to choose yourself over toxic family relationships? Hit the like button if you believe everyone deserves unconditional support during their darkest times, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and reinvention. Share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that their worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family you choose is more precious than the family you're born into.